I got Ben Ortiz with me. I am like crazy, like excited. I cannot believe it. Ben with me. We're going to talk hip hop culture. We're going to talk about journey. We're going to talk about just life stuff. Ben, welcome, Professor Latinx, the Latinx Pop Lab. Welcome.
Hey, man, I really appreciate you having me here. We recently connected, over another webinar, which we can get into a little bit, but it's an honor to be here. I'm a fan, I'm a supporter, and I'm a proud owner of a Professor Latinx t-shirt. So yeah, I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Awesome, man. Ben, we all have our different pathways, our journeys, but I would love to hear a little bit about how you got to like hip hop studies, how you got into the space that you're in right now. I know you have quite a story.
I've got quite a story. I've got a non-traditional story, an unusual story. Some would say an interesting story. True indeed. Let me just say at the onset that if you feel like I'm being a little bit long-winded or whatever, steer me a little bit, you know what I'm saying? Because I'm just going to go. Hip hop, being the subject matter that I work with on a daily basis, is something that has just organically been a part of my life ever since I was a very small child, 6 years old, 7 years old. I come from a border town known as Detroit, Michigan. That's my little joke. You know what I'm saying? In Detroit, in the early 80s, when hip hop was becoming a huge force in the mainstream entertainment industry, meaning it was spreading beyond its origin points in the New York City area. And it had this, we tend to think of like when something was born, right? Well, on what day was this born? So carrying that forward, I tend to talk about hip hop in terms of its childhood, its adolescence, its adulthood. So hip hop's childhood, its infancy and childhood is the early 70s through about the early 80s. Some would say 73 to 83. And there are some reasons why those dates are important. But around the time so I'm born in 78, right? I'm 42 right now. I was born in late 78. For all the history majors out there, I was born on the exact day of the Jonestown Massacre. Weird fun fact for you. Macabre, perhaps, but it is what it is. So I'm 5, 6, 7 years old. 84, 85, 86. You've got hip hop traveling well beyond its origin points in New York City. And you've got accessible even to children like myself, hip hop in coming out of certain camps like Def Jam Records, for example, Run DMC coming out of the Russell Simmons camp, that's also part of Def Jam, right? Fat Boys, the Juice Crew, Beastie Boys a little bit later on, LL Cool J, of course, one of my early idols, along with Prince Markie D of the Fat Boys, rest in peace, just passed away. So all of this is taking place when I'm a child. I'm from Southwest Detroit. Hip hop it's my neighborhood and my school. It's a very multicultural area, primarily African American, primarily Mexican American, but not in the ways that it's like 98, 99%. So hip hop is a thing that feels like our music, but it's also just popularized all across the globe at the time. So there's a lot of communities starting to feel like hip hop is our music. Much to the chagrin of people in New York City who, there's a certain pioneer generation who feels like the whole world essentially starts to leech away a little bit of what they built. I have a perspective on all those things, but I don't know if we're going too much on a lecture about what hip hop is. I'm just trying to talk about the moment in which it became important to me. So I'm thinking about certain artists that were popular to me as a child. I'm thinking about the fact that I never purchased any hip hop music from the record store until 1988. I distinctly remember the first thing I ever bought with my own money was an album called Coming Back Hard Again. Again, it's by the Fat Boys, one of my favorite groups as a kid. But a few years before that, I had developed a skill in hip hop known as beatboxing. All right, second grade, third grade, I'm like the beatboxer in class. And everybody in school, not everybody in school, but, you know, all my friends in a large group would just have these Run DMC lyrics memorized or these LL Cool J lyrics memorized and say, hey, beatbox, I want to do my rhyme. And it was before people were coming up with their own rhymes, as I recall. I don't remember anybody who was like the greatest rapper in class or anything like that. And that felt personal to me at the time. It's a skill I can still beatbox, but I'm going to spare you here in this podcast because I don't know what's the microphone situation here. I could bring this one down and do my thing, but I don't know. The next move for me after having all these kind of like bootleg cassettes that people would dub and pass around and whatever, as I said, I started to then purchase my own music. And that was around the time that my family moved to a suburb of Albany, New York. So we moved from the neighborhood in Southwest Detroit to the suburb in Albany, New York. Albany, New York is the capital of the state. Culturally speaking, it's very similar to New York City, much more so than where I was coming from or whatever, LA, wherever you're at. So I'm still very interested in hip hop. Hip hop is just a thing. Overall, music is a thing to me. I think we're going to get into that with some of your slides that I know you got queued up and me being a DJ and everything. But hip hop specifically, in the suburb that I moved to, I didn't have any friends at the time that were interested in hip hop. Not until I got to probably high school did I then again have a group of friends interested in hip hop. But I know that I got teased and I got made fun of by kids in that school for listening to hip hop. They felt that for one reason or another, it was silly, foolish, trivial, too Black, too Latino, too I don't know. And that's not to say that I was getting that treatment from everybody, but I'll tell you what, that sort of thing has a strong impact and influence on a person. You either run away from the thing that people are making fun of you for, or you run towards it and grip it even tighter. And the latter is what happened with me. So I began to, dive more deeply into hip hop history. This is around the time that certain books became more available to me. I had a little bit of spending money here and there. I could afford more to purchase more music myself. I still have all my old cassettes in the other room here. I still got them all, even the broken ones. And that's because I'm an archivist. So that's a lifelong identity. Throughout high school, I've got a group of friends. We are more passionate and sort of intellectual about hip hop. I remember there was a time when a local news channel came to our high school to do like a feature piece about the way that teenagers in the area are like tribalizing themselves based on whatever, back in the day, nerds, jocks, skaters, the hip hop kids and whatever. And I still have a VHS cassette. I'm about to digitize it actually, of this feature piece. And there's like, they're interviewing me and I'm going, and this is the hip hop kids over here. And then the rocket fuel was when I went to college. I went to a school called SUNY New Paltz, State University of New York at New Paltz, which is like an hour north of New York City. The vast majority of people at the school are from New York City, Long Island, or the areas just north of New York City. And, that's when, I got my first hip hop radio show in college. I had a hip hop magazine with a group of friends on campus. I started hosting, planning and hosting, not quite festivals, but, hip hop performance nights, not kind of like open mic nights, open DJ turntable night, dance performance nights, things like that. So it's always been a part of me personally, just organically. Never did I think this is going to be something in my career. All right. So the way that I arrived at my current position with the Cornell Hip-Hop Collection, you see our logo right back here. For the young folks in the audience, that is a cassette tape. I love talking to young people about technology. The Hip-Hop Collection here, which is a collection of archives. For those who might not know, I'm not sure what your audience kind of range is, but I would not make the assumption that everybody knows what hip hop is, what archives are. Archives tend to include not only books, but artifacts from paper, documents, magazines, audiovisual material, cassettes, records, CDs, all types of other AV formats that existed, from Betamax to U-matic and whatever. Photographs, personal records and family photographs, and in some instances, clothing, in some instances, artwork, original artwork, not copies of artwork. So archives, firsthand sources, the Cornell University archives where I work has existed in one way or another since our university's founding, which was in 1865, the year the Civil War ended. But the Hip Hop Collection was founded in 2007. At the time, I was working in an office at Cornell called the Public Service Center, where I was the K through 12 outreach coordinator. Whole different job. Hip hop has nothing to do with my career up to that point. I was in student services for many years after graduating from college. But when the archives were founded at Cornell, the individual who started that initiative assembled an advisory board of people who were staff, faculty, local performers or influencers or artists to advise on the activities of this new archive or group of a collection of archives. And so I was one of the inaugural members of that. And then fast forward all the way to May 2011, exactly 10 years ago, give or take a month, right? The position opened up, and I was, invited to ultimately become working the person that I am today, specializing on the Cornell Hip Hop Collection. And I've been in this role for 10 years. And that's, deepened and amplified my understanding of my identity as a hip hop head, as we call ourselves. So, as you can hear, I go on and on and on about various minute details regarding how a person gets to have their particular identity. How does a person arrive at this place? Where do they still have to go? So I don't know if you want me to do any screen sharing eventually, but I've got examples of stuff I could show. I don't know if that's a thing.
I love what you've got and where we're going with this and what you've shared. Let me ask you, Ben, what's the most, well, first of all, that hip hop is not just its identity, its music, it's a scene, but it's also now with the great labor that you bring to it, a respectable, say, right, scholarly, space of learning, of understanding our history, of where we've been, where we're going, all of these important things. Let me ask you, in this Cornell Hip Hop Collection, was there a really light bulb surprise, blow your mind moment when you got something that you just didn't even know was out there that kind of started to tweak your whole idea of hip hop?
Tweak my whole idea of hip hop. That is that's a really interesting question. The way that you phrased it isn't very common. In fact, I'm not sure I've had anybody ask me usually people ask, what was the thing you got that just blew your mind? Not challenged or made me kind of retool my whole understanding of hip hop. So it would take me a minute to really sit and think about all of the things that would get me to challenge or rethink hip hop. I will say my first reaction to that question is, I personally, there's this cultural value within the hip hop community. And people who have heard me talk and lecture know that I tend to make this distinction between the hip hop entertainment industry and the hip hop community. There's an overlap on that Venn diagram, but they're not the exact same thing, and far from it in many cases. In the hip hop community, in hip hop culture, one of our cultural values, our ethos, is to always be a student, always be seeking knowledge, wisdom, and understanding. And for me, that always manifested in among other ways as trying to learn and experience and explore as much about hip hop as I can from a time before I remember it, and from a time maybe during my first experiences with it. But again, I was a child, and your filters and perceptions are so very different from when you're an adult, So the answer to your question that I'm kind of formulating right now, having not been asked that question before, is there is so much material in the Cornell Hip Hop Collection dealing with what we call the pioneer era, the pioneer generation, again, roughly 73 to 83. And as you know, anytime you're talking about art, music, and culture, there are fuzzy boundaries to all of those things. There's never a hard border, but for convenience sake, 73 to 83 because of a couple of things I could get into. So learning so much more about things that I had, what I would have considered a deep knowledge about, but deepened my knowledge about the formation of various groups, performance spaces, listening to audio recordings or seeing video recordings from mid-late 70s, early 80s, things I had never seen before, that really enriched my understanding and knowledge, because I think it's important we all really explore and understand our positionality while not being truly limited by our positionality, right? So I'm not from the pioneer era. I'm not from the Bronx, but does that mean that I shouldn't be really investing a ton of my time and energy into understanding that, valuing that, so I can be able to talk about it in a way that is accurate and respectful and does justice. And I've been in rooms with so many hip hop pioneers who have heard me speaking about hip hop. And, when you get this like, because there are, in every instance, there's somebody kind of looking for you to kind of trip a little bit over a piece of information or whatever. And as educators, I think it's important that we know that it's important and acceptable to say, hey, look, this is where I'm coming from. And this is what I know, and this is what I don't know. And then calling upon people, that's another big value about the Cornell Hip Hop Collection, is putting people front and center who are from a particular geographic location or specific point, era in hip hop, and centering their voices and making sure that they have an opportunity to talk to audiences, teach, enter into the record their recollections and their experiences and their perspectives. That stuff is exceptionally important. And one of my favorite things to do is to be a facilitator of that. It's not really about me talking. I only talk to audiences when I don't have somebody else there as a guest speaker. Not to ramble on. Can your audience see us, or are they just seeing the slide?
They can see us. We're up in the corner. They can hear us and they can see us. Yep. Let me throw down something here, Ben, because you got my brain going all over the place, especially with Latinx creators and creatives of comics, because in a way there's a lot of parallels. And when I tell people that some of my books, some of my work is collecting, putting together in a systematic way of a history of our living, breathing archive of Latinx creatives. In a way, I feel a lot of affinity with what, you're doing and curating, but also, it keeps us on our toes because, we're not in a classroom learning about Shakespeare, and there's nothing wrong with that. We're out there learning and doing with the people doing and the creators, right? And the creating. And they keep us on our toes. They keep us on our toes, right? We can't, we can mess up, and usually they're pretty graceful with, that, but we also have to, it's just different, right? It's like not getting a grade on a paper because I messed up a date when, I don't know, Shakespeare did X, Y, and Z. It's like, no, it matters because these guys are out there doing this stuff right now.
Without question. I'll summarize what you just said with one word: relationships. I often view myself as really more so a person from the hip hop community working in the, as we might, colloquially say in hip hop, the belly of the beast, as opposed to, I've encountered professors who got interested in hip hop relatively recently as a sort of intellectual academic curiosity, and begin doing research and reading and, I don't know, conducting oral histories and things like that, and become knowledgeable, on their own. But I think, for me, it's always been an important thing to recognize. I'm a member of this community working here. And that's not readily apparent to a lot of folks upon just hearing about us. The school I work at is an Ivy League school, a predominantly white institution located in the Finger Lakes region of New York. Is not what you immediately associate with hip hop. And I've got a lot to say about how this thing even ended up here, but it's an interesting story. But relationships between myself, my organization, and the people in the community are probably the most prized thing. Sometimes people ask me, what's the most valuable thing in the collection? What's the most valuable thing in the archive? And, I understand where that question is coming from, but if I can just flip it and say, what is the most valuable thing about the hip hop collection? Is the relationships that we've built with the hip hop community and people who have entrusted their archives, the materials generated throughout the course of them living their lives and having their careers, following their passions, the materials from that, finding a safe home where they will be preserved and given new life in education. It's important, and it's not an immediate choice for a lot of people. That people don't want to part with their physical things that they've had forever. People feel like, I need to know who's working up in there before I, quote unquote, give them my stuff. And that's part of why, I do know that that's ultimately an important function, important quality for a person in my role to have.
Yeah.
You weren't looking at my camera when I was throwing this up when we were talking about your work.
Yeah, sweet. Decolonizing.
I just got it in the mail, party people. I'm looking forward to diving in. But there was a webinar about this book that a colleague of mine here told me about, and that's where you and I connected. So I'm shouting it out.
Hey man, it's that relationship, man. It's the relationship. Speaking of which, here at Columbus, Ohio, with
Buckeyes.
Buckeyes, with me and John Jennings.
I grew up a Wolverine fan, man. I'm sorry.
With John Jennings and me and a couple of other folks sitting around the table, and we're
shout out to John Jennings.
Yeah, for sure. We got to clear our own space to bring our Black and brown brothers and sisters, our indigenous brothers and sisters together in and through this thing that we love, comics. But now I feel like now is the, is it the epic, the moment for us, the movement for blurs and Latiners and creative scholars? Is this happening now, Ben?
First of all, you sent me that slide. I guess people are looking at the slide right now. I had heard the word blurred many, many years ago. Latinerd, I'm embarrassed maybe to say I hadn't actually heard somebody say Latinerd.
Well, you know what? Like it might be something I just made up. So
I think it's dope. Let me be clear. We're still wrapping our head around Latinx. Is it Latinx or Latinx? I heard somebody the other day, no lie, I heard somebody say Latinx, which I suppose I can see how that could be interpreted that way. So Latinerd, blurred movement, creatives and scholars. Let's see. I don't know if I've listened to this podcast since I've learned about it, the day we met. And, it's kind of interesting. It's still kind of dawning on me, but I don't quite know exactly who your audience is. I don't know if your audience is primarily blurs and Latinerds, or if it's people who are just as curious about what are those things. Nevertheless, I'm not sure the way you phrase it. I'm not sure of it. When you say, is this happening? Is it finally happening? I'm not sure that it wasn't ever not happening, which is a double negative I'm using on purpose. Is it becoming mainstream in academia? Sure. And this is your realm, man. I'm sitting here going, I want to hear him talk about this. But when it comes to things like comics, when it comes to things like visual art, and the way that those things have become a little bit more, comic art has become acceptable in the mainstream art world. Let's put it that way. Graffiti, which is a part of hip hop culture for a number of reasons, and comic art, which graffiti derived a ton of influence from, have never really been like mainstream art or acceptable in the gallery world or the highbrow art world. And I know a thing or two about this because I have a fine arts degree. I'm a painter. I went to art school. So having discussed this so much, I also hope that I can talk to you about my humble comic book bona fides, in terms of that being an influence on my own ability to draw and think creatively and so forth, but having it stifled as a career choice by my art teachers who thought it wasn't. I talk more about that. But in terms of the movement, calling it a movement is an action that solidifies a thing. You know what I mean? So let's call it a blurred Latinerd movement. I would hope that the inclusivity displayed by those two words would not suggest that it is a limited to just specific racial and ethnic groups thing either. It'd be nice if there was a general cultural movement that centers specific voices without it seeming like, hey, that person or that group cannot be a part of this. I find that slightly problematic, especially in the world of nerddom. Obviously, as you know, nerddom and being really nerdy about things, that's only been cool for the last decade or so. You and I probably grew up in a world where to be called a nerd is like the kiss of death, man. You know, but I don't know. I proudly refer to myself as a hip hop nerd on a daily basis. I'm a lifelong hip hop nerd. I wouldn't have used that word to describe myself more than 10 years ago.
Ben, let me ask you, I want to hear a little more about I want to push you a little bit on that fine arts and comics, that sort of threshold, and then the kind of, the force that pushed you away maybe from comics. So I want to hear a little bit about that. Give us the Ben Ortiz scoop.
All right, so let's talk about comics, right? The place I'll start with that. So everybody grows up knowing what the Hulk and Spider-Man and Superman and Batman is. Just, you can't avoid it growing up in the era we grew up in. I'm going to go here. I distinctly remember being in fourth grade. I was going to, I'm saying it was fourth grade. I remember this teacher did a whole, unit or whatever it would have been called in fourth grade with us on Greek mythology. Okay. I didn't know what that was prior to that moment, but hearing all of these, stories about heroes and monsters, I was very into monsters. I was, Star Wars, big part of my early memories. The first movie I ever saw in a theater is E.T. I remember Ghostbusters being a massive influence on my life. These kind of like grotesque monsters and things, to say nothing of the fact that I watched a lot of Muppet Show and Fraggle Rock, all right? So like weird creatures were just a thing. So reading about Greek mythology felt in that line. So my mother was very good about taking myself and my two younger siblings to the library and checking out books. I remember reading every book about Greek mythology that was in the local library. Equally fascinating to me, though, was the depictions of the characters. So it wasn't just about the stories to me, it was about the art. And some of my earliest artistic endeavors was recreating some of these Greek mythological monsters, cyclops and chimeras, dragons and all kinds of minotaurs and things like that. And they looked a lot like action figures that I had. I was a big He-Man and the Masters of the Universe kid. Transformers, but that's not really monsters per se. Thundercats, Silverhawks, who's with me? So naturally, when remember when I said I started to have a little bit of spending money, birthday money or whatever, I could go buy albums. I started to also buy comic books, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th grade. And I've said this in a room with some comic book, like diehard people, and it offended them. So I apologize in advance. I stopped collecting comics the moment I got my first girlfriend. Like, it was a wrap. It's over. It's over. No more comic books. But I kept collecting, what I kept on doing is drawing characters. So in the same way that I would try to recreate Greek mythological characters, I would try to recreate comic book characters. And I had sketchbooks and sketchbooks and sketchbooks. I was heavy into X-Men. So that's you and your whole Professor X thing, just like bang, connected with me. I would also create my own characters, not necessarily with too much intent on creating a comic book, but just like creating characters. And then I would write in the margins what their powers were and their biographies and what their real names were. And that was always the thing I was doing. And I would try to incorporate some of that stuff into my actual art homework. The high school I went to, thankfully, had a really phenomenal art program on its own, despite what I'm saying about it kind of pushing down my comic book desires and so forth. That's where I stayed after school. That was where I spent I used to play baseball, forget all of that. I'm an artist. That was my thing. I was voted most artistic in high school. It was like my thing. The the weird intersection between those two things, and the one time that I can really remember any of my art teachers in high school celebrating that I had this interest in comic books or monsters and mythology. In 11th grade, I drew a full size, like crouching down self-portrait head to toe. And in the background, I collaged Xerox copies of all my old Greek monsters and stuff from my old sketchbooks, which my mother saved and which I still have. I collaged all of those in the background because I thought it would be cool. Fast forward in a few months, my teachers in high school encouraged me to enter that thing into this regional art contest called the Scholastic Arts and Writing Competition. Well, I won the regional award, which meant it then went on to the national award, and I won the National Scholastic Art and Writing Award for this self-portrait with these drawings from 2nd grade, 3rd grade, 4th grade collage in the background. And it got displayed along with all the other national winners at the Corcoran Gallery in Washington, D.C. I'll never forget driving down there to accept the award, like in senior year of high school, and being completely out of my, what the hell is just happening? So it's interesting, man. Speaking of comic books, can I do something? I know that you're the authority on Latinx comic book creators and characters. And I've been sitting there kind of just ever since we connected for the first time a month or so ago. I've been thinking to myself, what can I remember about Latinx comic book characters in the books that I used to read? And I don't remember a whole lot, but one always stands out to me. And it stands out for a number of reasons. His name is Miguel O'Hara. You know who that is?
Mm-hmm. Yo,
Spider-Man 2099.
You know it.
From Nueva York.
Yeah.
Multicultural name, Miguel O'Hara. My father's name is Miguel. It stuck out to me. Just for this show, I went and dug in my own boxes, my own crates. This is issue 1.
Yeah.
Of Spider-Man 2099. That's it right there. I still have it. I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but
hold on to it. Hold on to it.
The first 12 Spider-Man 99s right here. Bam!
Bam! I love it. Dang.
So I'm a nerd. I didn't know it. I'm a Latinerd. I didn't know
You're a Latinerd. Ben, let's hear about well, actually everything you do, your work, your thinking, your music creation, your art it's like the umbilical cord is there into the world because you want to make it a better place for those like us who might not have had the chances or that little sliver of opportunity to get to where we are. Tell me about you and that part, and that was there I mean, some people ask me, like, was there that like person in your life? I'm like, yeah, my mom. It's like she sacrificed her life for us, and she wanted to make a difference. When we moved from Mexico, so I'm Irish, Guatemalan, American on my mom's side and Mexican on my dad's side. And when we moved to the US, single mom, and we were told not to speak that dirty Mexican. She put herself through college to make a difference. But there's so much in the air that you and I breathe that just makes us this kind of person that wants to make a difference. Tell me, what do you like? Where are you going with this right now?
That's a huge question. Wow. Where am I going with this right now? I don't know that the answer is super clear. The past, year plus, the pandemic has put a weird sort of spin on efforts that I would have been pursuing were it not for the pandemic. But I think one thing that I've observed is that the archives, number one, can be a attractant or something that is a key feature of, in this case, Cornell, for certain students and certain potential faculty, prospective students and prospective faculty, to say, I think I could find a home there. I think that would be a place where I can thrive because it speaks to either my work, my scholarship, my interests, my identity, the community I come from. I'm seeing people not quite enshrined, because we're not a museum, we're an archive. If you remember that an earlier slide you had, you saw a photograph of me standing in the archives, boxes and boxes of papers and materials. But when people see the university caring for images of works by people who are marginalized for one reason or another, it gives a sense of that place cares about me now. And so maybe an answer to your question is honestly continuing to find innovative ways of using the archives, in my case, the hip-hop archives, but the archives where I work. I mean, let me say one thing. When the Cornell Hip-Hop Collection started, it was with a group of material, about 6,000 things. Vinyl records, party and event flyers, photographs, other types of ephemera, meaning something that's designed to last only for a short bit of time, something that gets thrown away, something disposable. 6,000 things in 2007. Fast forward to today, we've got well over 500,000 artifacts in the hip hop collection here. So that's obviously going to continue to grow. But it's going to grow in a really interesting way, because a lot of the material that's being produced in the last decade, right on through to today, is what we call born digital. It's never been physical. It's created on a computer, which provides some interesting opportunities where people don't have to physically travel to where we are to enjoy the material. This last year has taught us that doing things online is viable. It's an interesting way with some interesting advantages of, utilizing archives, scholarly materials, getting people to not feel like the physical barriers of travel are a reason to not explore something. So as we build on the archives, there's an increasingly wide range of material to look at, increasingly wide range of people to build relationships with, and a decreasing sense that the geographic specificity has to be, a factor that's considered. There's not a transport of physical material when your whole career is, as I said, born digital, material that's never needed to be physical. No flyers, no cassettes or CDs or records, no physical photographs, etc. You know what I mean? When I do interviews like this, tomorrow, next week, I'm gonna be like, damn, I could have said this, I could have said that. But in the moment here, that's the answer that I've got. Where is this going? It's very difficult to decide. If we were doing this interview 10 years ago, I don't know that I would have thought one day we're gonna have 500,000 things, and I'm gonna give all my presentations in like Skype, which is what it was 10 years ago. So it's very difficult. It's very difficult to imagine.
Yeah, no, I love that, because you're getting at the significance of someone like you curating a space, clearing, making hospitable, making a home for people to feel like they have a home in otherwise alienating and otherwise spaces where they might not feel that. I think that's amazing, man. you also teach. You teach in so many different ways, but maybe you can share like the Ben Ortiz kind of like, you were just talking about, of course, like Zoom is during pandemic and reaching audiences that way, but I know you do podcasts and you do, of course, you DJ and you also teach formally in class, kind of classroom settings. Is there a kind of a Ben Ortiz like teaching trademark?
Caffeinated rants about stuff, maybe? I don't know. Let's see. Whenever possible, as I said, I like to have someone who is a practitioner of a particular art form, somebody who has a particular specific vantage point, whatever that may be, guest speaker in my class. Currently, I'm teaching my class Digging Through Hip-Hop, Artifacts and the Art of Facts. Shout out to the Artifacts crew, New Jersey, stand up. Basically, that's using archival materials as a complement to, teaching about sort of essentially hip-hop 101, but not, I don't teach it in a linear way. It's about an exploration of art forms and then where might that take us. It's not purely chronological, although I think that the students in the time that I've been teaching display a, where might their biggest lack of knowledge be when it comes to hip hop. And it's almost invariably with the pioneer generation and the quote golden age of the mid and late 80s, early 90s, again, which is my wheelhouse. That's what I grew up during. That's what I feel most close to and connected to. So last week in my class, I had a good friend of mine who goes by his name is Prophecy, MC Prophecy, from a crew called Antithesis, which is a indigenous crew with roots in San Jose, and currently he's in Washington State somewhere. I forget exactly where in Washington State, but centering his voice to speak to my students about his history and his vantage point as an MC, and getting the ability to speak about his own people's history. Where does the subject matter for his very revolutionary and very activist subject matter, his lyricism come from? So we spent the whole class with him as the speaker and me essentially interviewing him as if it were like a podcast.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm the same way. I as much as I can, I love to have that in real time knowledge making and remaking with me and a creator, a filmmaker, a comics creator, a TV person writing in the TV room, Latinx, as much as I can. I love that. I love what you're doing. That's also all about what you were talking about earlier in terms of relationships. Tell us about this. You DJ. I mean, I'm not surprised, but like, tell us a little bit about that.
Well, first and foremost, I was going to say that there's a whole range of people that I could list off that I have brought into my class. And I just want to point out, I want to tag one last thing onto that. It's not always about people who have, huge fame or a whole lot of, cultural recognition. It's people who are, doing their thing, but without like a huge amount of like music industry success or Instagram followers or whatever, even though I do have some folks coming to, like, we had an indigenous hip hop panel last semester, and Taboo from the Black Eyed Peas was one of the panelists, and obviously Grammy-winning, multi-million, triple dipple platinum artist was on that panel, along with my man who I was just talking about, and some other notable folks. That's what I wanted to make that distinction. People from the hip hop community, not always people that I know very well, but people who I'm able to reach out to and say, hey, can we make something happen? And again, that's where relationships come into play. I see you got the slide up, DJ Ha-Meen. My name is, people go, what is the Ha-Meen? Where'd you get that DJ name? My name is Ben Ha-Meen, and the other two syllables needed to get some love, because my nickname is Ben, right? Where's the Ha-Meen? But I can't just spell it Jamin, because that would look like jamming to people. And to call yourself DJ Jammin would be whack. That just sounds corny, right? So I didn't want people to pronounce it like that. So I went with this it's like kind of like a tongue-in-cheek, like dictionary phonetic pronunciation of my my other two syllables. Anyway, the photograph that you put up, let's see, you got something there, a graphic promoting something for a First Fridays event, which happened last May. Oh, geez, a year ago. Shout out to Las Cafeteras. You see, I got their shirt on, Yo No Creo en Fronteras. And I find that an interesting ethos. We borderize ourselves in some weird ways. I became a serious DJ around the time that I began my my work with the Cornell Hip-Hop Collection. Prior to that, I've been a lifelong music buff, certainly a lifelong hip-hop nerd, and I've had some, opportunities to DJ the odd house party, Halloween party. I remember a long time ago, I was a residence hall director, and I did a Valentine's Day party in my building's main lounge, just using my own music collection with bad equipment and or in college, like messing around with friends, we would do house parties together. My friend had the turntables and the vinyl collection. I had a vinyl collection, but no turntables. So I'd bring my stuff through and throw on something here and there. But more importantly, I would be the guy that grabs the mic and is the hype man or the beatboxer, or who wants to get on this mic, the facilitator. So I was playing around. I wasn't serious about being a DJ. When I started to work here and I got an opportunity to spend a lot of time with legends, people that I idolized growing up, for example, DJ Africa Bambaataa, who, in the last half decade, I can't speak about him publicly without saying, yes, I know that there is a thing that happened about a half a decade ago that has caused a great deal of controversy, and I can speak about that if we want to. But I just want to point out that this is a DJ who is almost the person who's most responsible for hip hop's growth and popularization worldwide through the formation of the Universal Zulu Nation. His let's call it a collective. I can get into history about that if you want. So spending a lot of time with Bam really got me to thinking, I gotta get more serious about this. There's another DJ, Breakbeat Lou, who is one of these like your favorite DJ's favorite DJ type of dude. Breakbeat Lou, my nickname for him is Encyclopedia. He knows more. He's forgotten more about music than I've ever known. He's like that dude. Breakbeat Lou, spending really quality time with him, with the archive. My big brother, Rich Medina, DJ Rich Medina, worldwide, one of the most well-known DJs working today, happens to be a Cornell alum. And we met because of the archives, and he wanted to get involved with some of our programming and initiatives. And he's become one of our most active alumni, and has led the charge with getting alumni to re-examine their relationship with a university that way back in their day didn't seem to value them as much as marginalized peoples and different identities, you know? So that's how I really became serious about DJing. You know, today it's like a core piece of my identity, but it's always kind of been in the sense that the nucleus of the atom of DJing is sharing music with people. All right. I've when I was a kid, I used to dub tapes and, you know, make a little mixtape for people. I go like this because back in the day, there was a pause and a record button. Look it up, young people. I'd share music with people constantly, and we would trade tapes back and forth, trade music or whatever. That's kind of a thing you do in hip hop. You're constantly doing what we call each one teach one. You know something that I don't know. And I know something that you don't know. And the fact that we mutually value that and want to learn from one another is a very hip hop, is a very, very important part of hip hop cultural ethos. So the way that I move in the DJ space today, you know, certainly, of course, pandemic, it's been all Zoom parties. But aside from that, you know, I do nightclubs, I do weddings, I do private parties. I've DJ'd yoga classes, all kinds of things. It's interesting, the opportunities that I've had. I would say that my calling card is having a hyper diverse range of music that I play. Not just sticking to the top 40, not just sticking to the songs that everybody would request if it were an all request night, if that makes sense. I take requests, but there's a whole other discussion about how DJs do or don't take requests. That's its own little sociological study. But in blending hip hop from different eras, first of all, hip hop is nothing more than, well, I shouldn't say nothing more than, but fundamentally it's a collage of other influences. So you're able to learn about and explore an entire range of music out there in the world, from all different eras, from all different corners of the globe, really. If you're looking at the art form known as sampling, and if you're looking at the earliest form of sampling, which would be isolating what's called break beats from various genres such as funk and soul and R&B and rock and salsa and reggae, and isolating these percussion duets or solos. And when you start to learn about the places that some of the most revered hip hop breakbeats come from, you're often surprised. Big Beat is probably the biggest one. It's this hair metal rock song from the early 80s that is one of the most sampled breakbeats of all time, including in 99 Problems by Jay-Z or Live at the Funhouse by Run DMC and so many others. So I really, really enjoy mashing up and blending and having different genres of music that you might not be thinking about colliding together, and creating a unique tapestry, a unique, diverse, multicultural, multi-vantage point soundscape. And each time I rock, it's like a fingerprint. It's going to be slightly different every single time I do that. I'm not a battle DJ with a routine that I do every single time. If that makes sense. Am I rambling yet?
Ha-Meen, man. Yeah, I can't wait for this thing to get behind us and me to be up in one of these spaces with you doing your
Let's do a Zoom party.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, for sure, I'm going to get you out to Austin for my Latinx Pop Lab Extravaganza Spring 2022. Got to get you in there, doing your stuff, doing your teaching, doing your soundscaping.
With it.
Cultural appropriation, man. So I want to, there's always that fine line, right? There's like, no, it's, this is blending, this is, mashup, this is, and then suddenly though, something like flips and you're like, nah, this isn't that anymore. This is something else. What, enlighten.
Well, you know something? You had sent me a draft of this slideshow a few days ago. And while I've seen cultural appropriation over and over again for a decade plus, I'm not sure I've seen hip hop hipsterism before. So that's an interesting spin. And I would say that's a great term. Did you coin that? That's such a great way of refocusing the discussion about cultural appropriation, which, I feel like you've been in higher education longer than me, and you remember when diversity and social justice were like new terms, and people kind of understood the important like focus of what we were trying to get at with those words, and then eventually they get a little diluted and lose a bit of meaning, I think, especially in the case of diversity, which can we please stop taking words that are already like clearly defined in a dictionary and just saying now it means this. So yeah, cultural appropriation is interesting when you talk about hip hop being so importantly, crucially, critically, fundamentally something that formed in the way that we understand it today by young, poor, Black and brown youth in the Bronx in the 70s, which there's so much written about the Bronx in the 70s. I'd like everybody, if you're interested in learning more, there's a fantastic documentary on, I think it's still on Netflix, called Rubble Kings. Rubble Kings is a story about gang culture and gang life immediately preceding the birth of hip hop in the Bronx. The last time I had Bam on campus, by the way, Bam Bada was with the director of that film and our superintendent and a famous activist from the Bronx talking about that film. So that's the origin point of hip hop. They, as I said, were incorporating all of these different cultural influences, all these different sources into hip hop itself. One thing I do emphasize to, when I have the opportunity to speak to students who are a little bit less educated about hip hop, it's important to think about for hip hop's first, roughly decade as we know it. I keep emphasizing as we know it because it wasn't like a poof, now hip hop is there. There's like a snowball effect of many different things. But for roughly the first decade of hip hop's existence, it wasn't like the DJs or anybody in that community could go to the record store and purchase hip hop to listen to. You had to go to these events to hear DJs reinterpret music that they found from, raiding their parents' record collections or going to record stores and what we call digging through the crates and trying to find interesting music. And at the time, this is before Shazam, this is before the internet, a DJ's main goal ultimately to give themselves an identity was to find music that no one else had and then protect the identity of that music. So you'd see a lot of records with tape obscuring the labels and, because the other DJs could not then just go, I'm going to go buy a copy of that thing because it thumps at this show right here. So it's important to look at the innovation and the creativity of this community. Again, young, poor, Black and brown youth in the Bronx, looking at the entire, whatever the world has to offer out there in the media from, I shouldn't just say the media, obviously, but the music industry, looking at dance moves on television, you're looking at Soul Train, you're looking at, in some instances, like a Bruce Lee movie and going, I want to do that flip while I'm dancing, and incorporating interesting kind of interesting aspects of things that you kind of just pick up and collage together. Vocal traditions, call and response vocal traditions are millennia old. Many different places on the planet have what could be identified as call and response oral traditions, but we most closely associate that with the African continent and specifically Western Africa. And that's something that found its own footing and shaped itself into something specific as a result of the transatlantic slave trade, and in North America, what was going on. Then there's this huge Caribbean influence in the Bronx, where not just vocal traditions, but rhythmic traditions, rhythms like people who listen to salsa know what tumbao is. Du-tum, ba, du-tum, ba. Or clave, right? Ba, 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 ba. These are ancient rhythms that can be traced to Western Africa, again, millennia old, but they find themselves getting transported along with the bodies, right? And gaining a new interpretation in what ultimately becomes, in that case, Afro-Cuban folkloric music that finds its way into popular music such as mambo, later on salsa. There's another interesting hybridization called boogaloo, which people should look up. I'm really upset, by the way, that word lately is being associated with a white supremacist group. So I feel sad about that. So I feel like we need a musical boogaloo revolution to bring it back. People should look up a movie. There's a documentary called We Like It Like That, which is a play off that song I Like It Like That, but it's the history of boogaloo music. Anyway, all of this stuff is getting pressed onto records and sold at record stores, and the earliest hip hop DJs have some of that source material to incorporate into what ultimately comes to be seen as hip hop. I know I'm being, long-winded with this, but I think it's important to sort of set that stage that borrowing influences is a thing that creative people do. And I think that is a part of this discussion. When it comes to actual appropriation, simply, you could say if it lacks appreciation, it is appropriation, but that's a simplistic kind of like bumper sticker way of talking about it. There are entities like record companies or corporations who utilize hip hop to sell products, or to, in some instances, take their vast resources and put them behind artists that then become popular on their record label or through their efforts that might not otherwise be popular. And in some cases, you could say are detrimental to be out there as like the popular zeitgeist's impression of what hip hop is. Sometimes I call out different artists' names, and people in class go, "Ooh, he said that about so and so." I'm not really going to do that here like that, but I think that when I like to talk about music like it's food. All right, food is either nutritious or junk food. Fundamentally, either it has nutritional value or it's just purely enjoyable for dessert. There's a reason we don't eat dessert for every single meal. Some people's listening habits, they're listening to the junk food equivalent of music all the time. What effect does that have on them? I think there's probably some scholars out there doing some work on, I don't know, like the example in the last year, let me just say this. I've been in some spaces where I've heard young people, younger than young, reciting verbatim every single word to the most popular hip hop song of the last year, which is a song about a well-functioning female genitalia. Let's put it that way. If you know what I'm talking about, WAP, look it up. What does that do? Does it has its place? Of course it has its place. But when it's the most popular thing and 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds are like, that's the music of my youth, I wonder where that will lead us. And again, I need to emphasize that the record companies, the entertainment business is giving marketing dollars to specific artists who are not necessarily pushing any nutritious music out there. And I think that is a form of appropriation that is not talked about in this context too often. I think, frankly, we're talking about cultural appropriation when you see something like you've got this slide of for example, I see several different people of what I perceive to be a range of races and ethnicities with braids in their hair or cornrows, or I see some locks, I think, dreadlocks, but hair is its own subject entirely. There are certain fashion trends associated with hip hop, though, of course. And when something gets popularized as a hairstyle or a slang word or a different type of, way of wearing whatever, your pants or your boots or your sneakers or whatever the case may be, the way culture works is that stuff filters out to people, and there's constant. It's like the ocean. There's constant waves crashing on the shore. Sometimes you could probably say, hey, that wave right there contains a droplet of water that 100 years ago also crashed upon the same shore. Not to get too ethereal with it, but the way culture works is that it gets absorbed by different people. I think the most important thing to examine with cultural appropriation is whether or not a person engaging in a particular practice, using a slang word, using a particular hairstyle, or producing a type of music. I think it's important to examine, are they giving credit where it's due to where it comes from? Do they understand where it comes from? Do they understand the importance of where it comes from? Do they understand the struggles maybe of the communities that birthed whatever it is, hairstyle X, music style Y, slang word Z? I think we should stop short of saying, you can't do that, whatever that is. I don't think trying to control people in that way is the answer to a cultural appropriation. I think education really is the answer here. And I think that as people become a little more knowledgeable about the things they're doing, knowledgeable about where different things come from, I really think that that's going to be the antidote. But it's going to need to be a constant waves of antidote, because we have new generations all the time not knowing stuff. It's important for people like really everybody listening to this right now knows something that is worth teaching to somebody else. And without that taking place, we are going to end up in a weird space where people feel like possessive of this particular cultural tradition or music or style. And there's a difference between possessive and sort of proud of and protective of. All right. And you know what? There are so many people out there doing work that I'm sure can speak a little more eloquently than me about this, but this is a thing that comes up in my classes a lot. And I tend to just cap it off by saying there's another phrase in hip hop that's extremely important to our cultural ethos. It ain't where you're from, it's where you're at. Like, where is your headspace right now is a way of looking at that phrase. What do you know? What do you value? Who are you lifting up in your, whatever you're doing, whether you're a DJ, whether you're a professor, whether you're a B-boy or B-girl or a breaker, you know, whatever, what are you lifting up? Who are you giving homage to? Who are you recognizing as a root of a thing that you're now doing? Mm-hmm. So I think that those concepts are really, really important for all of us to examine, but especially young people, you know, as this term of cultural appropriation has been just in their lexicon since they were in elementary school now. So I often just ask the young people, what do you think about that? Mm-hmm. What are your perceptions about this? Mm-hmm. Does it go both ways? Is it only a one-way thing? You know, and I'm sure the audience out there is going, yes, it is this, or yes, no, it is that. That's exactly where I want this. I'd like the debate to go mm-hmm. further. Ultimately, education is going to be the key to everybody's awareness and knowledge about who should be supported, who is in need of support, who is in need of protection. That's the equitable way of looking at culture, I suppose.
I love it, Ben. Educate, don't obliterate.
I like that.
Saints and sinners. You brought up Africa Bambaataa. We don't need to go down that road, but you know, this is back to this entertainment industry versus community, and community as that space of seeking wisdom and understanding that you and I have been talking about this whole time. And of course, we got Cardi B here. You just mentioned that song that people are playing and chanting, and yeah, we don't need to go down there. But let me ask you, saints and sinners. It feels like, and you and I talked about this, no matter how much we do, whether you're a creative, an academic, no matter what path you've chosen as a Latinerd, a Latinx, Latinx, blurred, wherever we want to go with that, we are always in this precarious, like we exist in precarity. It's like people are just waiting for us to make a slip, and we go from saint to sinner, you know. And, you know, Daniel Hernandez is like, you know, maybe for me kind of embodies that I know there's a lot of complexity around him. But, you know, like the media and the way it jumped on that is a good example, I think, for me. But maybe you have some thoughts on this.
Let me exhibit some behavior that I don't think we should be shy to do in academia, but a lot of people have a shyness or a like, Daniel Hernandez, I know 3 of them. Which one are you talking about?
Tekash 69.
Is that his name? All right. Yeah. I mean, I know who that is. I'm looking at I don't think I knew his real name. I knew he has a Latinx identity, sure. Cardi B also, I see you've got Cypress Hill, and I can't make out who's at the bottom there.
I think those were just some kind of new gens that are on the scene. But yeah.
Well, all right. So I think ultimately what you were alluding to with a person who has a slip up, and then people jump on that. Maybe this is a discussion, the big discussion lately, you know, cancel culture and whether or not individuals should be canceled. And then, you know, I think looking at, you know, saints and sinners, that's not phrasing that I have used in discussing anybody in hip hop. It is very binary, a little pseudo-religious maybe. I think that we should take a humanist approach in looking at one another, striving to find reasons. Why did a person do or say that? Trying to understand what they're going through. if we are to get to a place as a society that I think we all really seem to collectively want it to go, but of course there's different approaches. One of the central ingredients has to be a little bit of empathy. Tekashi 6ix9ine, I've probably heard one of his songs. I suppose at this point I've just resisted listening to his albums or whatever. And if I did that, it would be a purely intellectual exercise. Hip hop is so wide and diverse across different genres and languages and subject matter and generations and eras that there's no way that I ever want to paint myself as an expert on it all. Mm-hmm. Of the people you've got up on that slide, of course, Cypress Hill, I've heard way more of them than Cardi and Tekashi. Cypress Hill being, for my generation, just one of those like early examples of Latinx masculinity, plug it, in the space that I'm looking at in hip hop. So I know that there was some criminal activity with Tekashi 6ix9ine, and I think when you're looking at a crime and legal troubles, I just like anybody else, I don't want anybody to be instantly labeled as a sinner. There's a person with a particular problem or issue, and it's interesting, just because he's a person in the Latinx not diaspora, but sort of mega umbrella group. I want to see him succeed just for that sort of like emotional thing. Same could be said, just because he's a member of hip hop, I feel an affinity. Remind me what his crime was, because I think it was gang related. There was some actual violence. It's not like this was like tax fraud or something like that. There's violence. Call me crazy, I haven't kept up with Tekashi 6ix9ine very well. He's a young person.
I feel like when we slip, it's always a slip that takes us, rubber bands us back to like our barrios, our ghettos, are like, and I mean that in the way that mainstream codes those spaces as like violent, degenerate, degraded, uncivilized. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, top of the game, we slip, and then boom, we are right back. Like that's why. Everybody's saying that's why,
Yeah. Anytime you hear somebody talk about, quote, hood shit, it's never anything especially positive. And I think that that's unfortunate, because there are a lot of people doing a lot of amazing things to uplift their hoods, their neighborhoods, their communities, whatever, foundations and actual financial resources, education centers, and the list, certainly goes on. In the case of Cardi B, I'm a hip hop dude. Call me crazy. I'm not an expert on on her whole career. My understanding is that her initial entry into the entertainment industries as an exotic dancer. And there's so much to say about that particular world, and her kind of like grinding to do what she got to do, to put a roof over her head, food on the table, all of that. I think there should be a dignity to that, even though it's, it operates in a sphere that we tend to look at as decidedly salacious, So, and somewhere along the line, she becomes famous, like on social media. And then someone goes, what you should do is we should give you a record deal. And the next thing we know, she is the biggest hip hop star on the planet. It's interesting to me. And there are hip hop stars throughout every generation that have come to be so from some interesting paths. Bambaataa, former gang leader. That dovetails with the discussion about Tekashi 6ix9ine. In his case, he reformed his life and created this anti-gang, which looks like a gang on the surface, but it's not. Peace, unity, love, and having fun is the ethos of the Zulu Nation, which is, they have chapters everywhere on the globe right now, in every language, across every socioeconomic status, language, religion. That to me is one of hip hop's potentials right there, is this ability to spread philosophies of peace, unity, love, and having fun across the globe. Cardi B, she's going to make her money not rhyming about, we wouldn't expect her to be like Dead Prez or Immortal Technique or Public Enemy or something like that. It's the people out there in the world who are really just going, that's what I want to listen to. Give me more of that. It's fun. It's salacious. It's a little taboo. That's why The Chronic by Dr. Dre blew up the way it did in the early 90s. It was all about weed. It's all about gang violence. It's all about, not 100%. There are some fantastic pieces. First of all, musical production on The Chronic, no doubt. But there are some lyrical commentary that I think is crucial and important in looking at the LA riots, issues of racism and police brutality in that moment in time, in that space. So anyhow, I really got to stop at calling anybody a saint or a sinner, though. I think that we're complex individuals, and it's been said 2 times, we don't really have to go there when we talk about Bambaataa. However, let me go there just for a second, because that's an interesting example of somebody who has well-documented and revered contributions to not only hip-hop culture, music, hip-hop music and dance music, by the way. Dance music being kind of this like generic way of describing what at the time was electro-funk, which becomes kind of Latin freestyle and bleeds into house music. And now we got EDM and whatever, generally just call it dance music, or hip house, one of my favorite genres. Revered for being a person who would go into spaces all across the planet where there's human conflict, usually gangs, not like war zones, but hoods around the planet where there's like real gang violence, where young people are for some reason without the ability to see past their differences, and they're not able to see their commonalities and how to get past these conflicts about who stepped on whose turf, or you come from that block with that name and I come from this block with this name, therefore we got to be lifelong enemies. He's revered for spending decades going around teaching young people how to work out their differences, unify, come together around a common purpose. And that is hip hop. That's a part of hip hop. It's not a performative musical element of hip hop, but that's an element of hip hop. And fast forward into 2016, I think, there were some allegations that came to light that he had molested a minor, a teenage boy who, was connected to him and his crew at some point in the past. And then it came that there was maybe more of them. I think I'm gonna have to go back and look, probably about 4 or 5 who have come to light to this point. There's a lot to say about those things. Number one, in the hip hop community, over the last half decade, there's been a lot of conflating or treating let's put it that way, treating the fact that this was a man with another man or a boy as the actual wrong part. So that's homophobia in it, just like a raw form, instead of focusing on the idea that this is a minor, a person who hasn't really got the ability to resist or can be easily coerced. We're not talking about like an infant or anything like that. This is a teenage from all reports. So that's like decidedly wrong. But in looking at Bambaataa as a complex human being with flaws, but also accolades and reasons to not completely cancel his entire history from the record, no pun intended, record. But I still talk about his influence and his importance, all the while acknowledging, the thing that took place allegedly is highly problematic, cause for him to, again, sticking with saints and sinners, cause for him to, repent or have some sort of punishment, no doubt. I think that if a trial ever happens, the world's eyes will watch it very closely. I think the court of public opinion has convicted him, though, and that is what happens. Fair enough. I just don't want to see us look at him as purely a sinner without any redeeming qualities throughout the course of his career. How's this for a comparison? Abraham Lincoln. I'm going to hold an ill direction right now. There's a bust of Abraham Lincoln in our library. Again, our university is founded at the end of the Civil War. We have a lot of documentation about the Civil War era, the abolitionist movement. The founder of Cornell was a strong, highly involved abolitionist. And Lincoln is seen as this heroic figure to come out of the Civil War era. We have the Gettysburg Address. We have a copy of the Emancipation Proclamation in the archives, and topics dealing with abolishing slavery in this country. Obviously, there's the 13th Amendment issue, but so he's just regarded as this like heroic figure. We've got this bust in the library. Several years ago, though, I was hosting a hip hop artist named Superman at the archives, who was visiting campus to give some talks and to tour the archives. Superman is an indigenous hip hop artist. Upon walking into the library, he looked at that bust of Abraham Lincoln and he said, I understand the good things that he did regarding abolishing slavery and so forth, but did you know he also authorized, as the commander-in-chief of the United States Army, the largest mass lynching in the history of this country? It's a massacre of, there's a number, 30 something, I don't have it memorized, 30 something Lakota and Dakota men who were seen as enemy combatants of the United States at the time. And Abraham Lincoln authorized that. So when we're talking about lynching, that's the largest mass lynching in this country's history. So him pointing that out about Abraham Lincoln, and I didn't have knowledge about that, but that's one of those like, thank you for giving me that knowledge and that sort of, so I, bringing it up to the leadership of our library, we've decided having the bust of Abraham Lincoln, I think that represents the totality of everything he's done because it's just an image of him. So maybe we remove the bust, but we keep this Gettysburg Address facsimile as a kind of like a compromise. This is a decidedly good thing he did, the Gettysburg Address, but we don't want anyone to come into the space and say that person massacred people who are my people. That is not, that is an interesting connection I like to make with Bambaataa. Is a person all bad or all good? I know that's reaching, but that's what I do as a DJ also. Is how about I connect this dot with that dot and let's see if that blows your mind or not. Whatever.
I love
long
it.
answer to a great question.
So as we kind of start winding this down, Ben, we see like hip hop, you've already talked a little bit or mentioned this already. It's global, right? But it's also global in ways that really, have crossed, from my kind of naive side of the table, we've got women all over the world, creating hip hop. And I was just wondering if you might talk a little bit about that. I think for me anyway, it's pretty remarkable.
Right. Let's see. The globality, is that a word? Of hip hop is one issue, and women in hip hop another issue. They're related, but let me talk about women specifically. So women have always been present in hip hop's history. Going back to, for example, DJ Kool Herc's sister Cindy, who organized the party on August 11th, 1973, where DJ Kool Herc did a thing that is identified as leading to all of hip hop, that is isolating a breakbeat as he's DJing, and doing a merry-go-round, as he called it, of breakbeats. So Cindy Campbell is sometimes looked at as the mother of hip hop. I don't necessarily like to call anybody like a parental figure, but that's just a name that she's been given by some folks. All the way to MC Sha Rock, the first woman MC who started doing her thing. I believe she said 75, 76, but she really ultimately became known as a member of a group called the Funky 4+1, who had a lot of interesting achievements and accolades, but they also happened to be the group that performed hip hop live on TV for the first time. It had never been performed live on national television before. It was the Valentine's Day show of Saturday Night Live, 1981. But my point is that women have always been present in all of the art forms and spheres of hip hop, right? We're talking about, again, a subset of our core artistic elements that develop around the same time: breakbeat DJing, MCing, rapping, b-boying, b-girling, or breaking or breakdancing, and graffiti, aerosol art, style writing. Those sort of things are developing independently with independent roots, and then kind of coalesce in that same young, poor, Black and brown community in the Bronx at the same time, with essentially the same sort of community of people across that borough of New York City. And women are there the whole time. The discussion about whether or not women had anything to do with the birth of hip hop, I think that, the birthing of hip hop being a decidedly woman-oriented metaphor, I think it's important to continue to learn about the women that were there. Lots of groups that haven't gotten a lot of recognition, the Mercedes Ladies, the Sequence, Queen Lisa Lee, who was like the first lady of the Zulu Nation, and the Cosmic Force, which was Bambaata's crew at the time, before the Soul Sonic Force. I think it's important to highlight them. I think it's important to give them as many opportunities to tell their story as possible, and that has happened quite a lot. But then there's this 1980s, 1990s, where you can observe that the people who were given the opportunity to record, whether it's a big record deal or just putting something together in what we now call an indie kind of ethos, which at the time we might have just said underground hip hop, there's just like a much greater number of men than women in those spaces. There's a number of reasons for that. That could also be said for the graffiti space. the dance space, specifically breaking, though, and with DJs. There's a culture of competition that in one way would be kind of like creatively healthy and sharpening steel and creating a better and better and better outcome and artistic outcome for all of those disciplines I just talked about. But the other side of that coin is a hyper aggressive, toxic masculinity that in many ways ended up pushing women away from wanting to be anything besides just an observer in the crowd. That is not exclusive. There's always been amazing women MCs, DJs, dancers, specifically breakers, but hip hop dance isn't just break dancing, you know? And then aerosol art, graffiti space. In the late 90s, 2000s, right on to today, you start to see a balancing of genders and incorporation of other genders besides the binary, I think is important to mention as well. But in this exact moment, right now, we're starting to see women be more frequently centered, I think, in hip hop, because this is an intentional thing that the community is recognizing, even the media is recognizing. Hey, let's do this. Let's make this happen. You know, from, as we were talking about, Cardi B, and then before her, Nicki Minaj is like top dog in the recording industry almost at all times. Beyonce isn't so much a rapper, but we're kind of indistinguishable at this point between the R&B world and hip hop world, and how those things have cross-pollinated over the generations. When you look at Destiny's Child first coming out in 1997, listen to No, 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 the remix with Wyclef Jean from the Fugees. And it's a rap verse, but it's got melody in it. So Beyonce is essentially one of those rappers who sings, or is she a singer who raps? We don't quite know, but they marketed her as a singer along with Destiny's Child, obviously. Wyclef Jean, I mentioned the Fugees, got to shout out Lauryn Hill, L Boogie, one of my favorite MCs growing up. Along with, before that, Roxanne Shante of the Juice Crew throughout the 80s was like the woman that was like, yeah, I want to hear more from her. Lynn Q, Bahamadia. I mean, I could run through all of these women. I love talking about this subject. There's a woman that just performed at Cornell, quote, at Cornell on Saturday. It was a Zoom thing because of COVID-19, but it was like a live performance for the students. Princess Nokia. I don't know if folks have heard about her, but she's got a whole decade of material at this point. A Latina from New York City with some really, really interesting commentary about body issues, cultural heritage, and she's, you know, a dope MC. She gave a great performance and a little Q&A afterwards. Another person that in my space, Cornell, and you know me, that is somebody I'd love people to look up, is a performer named Sammus, Sammus. Speaking of blurs, she's like Queen Blurred. All right, she's one of the dopest MCs that I've heard in a long time, and she produces the vast majority, if not all, of her own tracks, her music, beats, and so forth. She grew up in Ithaca. I met her when she was a student, an undergraduate student at Cornell, but she progressed on through and now has her PhD from Cornell as a lecturer at Brown University in a hard science, by the way, a PhD in a hard science. But she's also this prolific hip hop artist who I've had speak in my classes. Everybody out there, if you want to look her up and you want to get her blurred, her Queen Blurred credentials, there's a track she's got called, I think it's called Video Games and Cartoons. Sammus, Sammus. Video Games and Cartoons, and that song is already 6-7 years old. fun fact, her mother happens to be one of the senior professors in our Africana Studies and Research Center. And she's like her great uncle, I think, great uncle, second uncle was Patrice Lumumba, which, she's got a super interesting story. And I memorized her bio like that, but she's the homie. And, when I think about women on the horizon who could potentially, have not on the horizon, but really have some mainstream success, let alone a huge career on into the future, she stands out to me.
And this has been,
and there's so much I can say about women in hip hop. Shout out to the ladies, always.
Yeah, man, thank you. Vitality, I mean, in a way with, Samus and Princess Nokia and others that you've just brought up, we've already been getting at this vitality, this where the heartbeat is today in hip hop soundscapes, scenes. Are there a couple of these that you would like to add to as we kind of wrap up our talk on hip hop?
You mean more artists, more up and coming artists, or
just what are you listening to today that's just grabbed you? Like, oh, shit, this is like this is hip hop in a way that I've never experienced it.
Boy, that's a good question. In a way that I never experienced it. Let me see if something will come to mind. It's the in a way I've never experienced it piece that's got me hung up here. Let me answer it this way first. I think growing up when I grew up in the 80s and the 90s, and honestly having the awareness that there was a cisgender male, straight male domination of the art forms, again, not exclusive, but skewed heavily. I had awareness of that. So to hear today the huge number of women, from all viewpoints, all vantage points, as well as LGBTQ artists, especially especially transgender artists, which I think placing them in another time and era, it would be virtually impossible to conceive of them having a music career, let alone a hip hop career in the mainstream music industry. And to see that, that's emerging and probably going to be a defining characteristic of the music scape, specifically the hip hop scape, which on its own is hugely varied, and it is encouraging and interesting, and I'm excited to see where that goes. Everybody's got one of these devices now, and people can essentially create something with it. Not everybody's got a computer, but you know what I mean. The vast majority of people out there have access to a personal, laptop or a phone or something of that nature, and can create music that way. And seeing what's going to come out of that in the next decade or so is like, I'm waiting like, wow, let's see what this is. I want people to blow my mind, Mm-hmm. I'm looking, by the way, is that Anitta in your slide? Mm-hmm. The Brazilian singer?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's a transgender artist that has done a few dance tracks with her, produced by, what's his name? Homeboy from Wow, it's totally just slipped my mind. I think the singer's name though is Pablo Vittar. I could be wrong. Phenomenal vocalist, not a hip hop artist, but more of a singer. Amazing, amazing voice. Why can't I think of this dude's name? The producer. He does all the dance. It's right on the tip of my tongue. Damn! Don't you hate when that happens?
Happens to me all
Diplo. It's Diplo.
Diplo. Yeah. Okay.
Diplo. Yeah. Anyway, and Anita, Brazilian music has always blown my mind, every type of genre. Another way I'm going to answer your question is the continued thing that I've done my whole life, and that is discover other music because it was used as a musical element in the collage of hip hop somewhere, somehow. I'm constantly finding new samples, new albums to listen to. I've got lists in various note-taking apps, as well as my streaming apps, called Listen to This. And I've just got hundreds of thousands of songs that I have yet to listen to over the years, that I'm constantly finding things that I go, I want to listen to this, I want to listen to that. So I'm just a voracious consumer of music. I'm always looking for something I can play on a dance floor. But when it comes to something that I got to say, I got to know where that sample is from. I gotta dig into it. You can usually look these things up online today, and it takes you down a rabbit hole. Mm-hmm. And experiencing hip hop in the sense that you're looking more so into the source material. I find that singularly fascinating. Perhaps no surprise. I work in an archive, Beyond that, I've seen some dancers who are doing things that I didn't know the human body could do. I've seen visual artists, aerosol artists, just when you thought you've seen a photorealistic spray paint mural, somebody comes along and, oh my God, I can't believe the control and the skill that's being employed with these painters using the medium, the old school spray paint can, but with maybe a new cap or a new type of propellant or a new shade of paint that a particular company has come out with. There are whole spray paint companies devoted to visual artists now. It's not about trying to find the Rust-Oleum brown can of paint and then hoping it works for your mural, I also will say that hip hop scholarship, there's books about hip hop coming out. There's people doing all kinds of interesting projects, and you hear about these things at conferences. You know how it is when you meet other scholars and you hear presentations about various things, and it goes to show you that hip hop has really it's come so far in this half century that it's been around, but you kind of get this sense that it's still just getting started in a way. And this is, speaking as a person who's immersed in the subject all day, every day. It's incredible. So I could ramble on about that maybe, and I'm trying not to because I feel like we're coming to the end, but hopefully that makes sense what I said. And I'm not sure if you've heard some people talking about things dovetailing with comic books. There are hip hop comic books, like a lot. John Jennings. You mentioned John Jennings at the onset. I met him at a hip hop conference like a decade ago, and he's like a revered, comic book authority. I've spoken in his classes before, over Skype back before anybody was thinking we're gonna have a Zoom thing. I saw him on the Marvel channel now. The Disney app. I had to text him like, yo, blowing up. You blowing up, son. Yeah. And that's encouraging to see. So hip hop is certainly not just music. It's never just been music, but it's really starting to get to the point where even the average person is not really thinking about it as just music anymore.
Mm-hmm. Well, Ben Ha-Meen, Ortiz, gracias. You've talked you talk about community and the significance of hip hop as allowing for a clearing and making of the space of community, but also a community where we seek wisdom and understanding. I want to thank you for opening that for me and for our listeners here today.
It's 100% my pleasure. Thank you for letting me into this space. Thank you for building with me. And thank you for being a really nice and open and welcoming cat. From the moment that I sent you just one little comment, where can I get that t-shirt? You've been doing the work of building community yourself. And I want to acknowledge that. And I appreciate the work you're doing. I love podcasting in general. I'm hyped to continue reading this book that I just got and finding others. And hopefully we'll cross paths sooner than later. Thank you to the audience for sticking with it for this long. Hopefully the sound of my voice isn't yet like nails on a chalkboard. But I just wanted to say to folks, our archives are open to people. You can utilize our materials and contact me. You don't have to have a Cornell affiliation or anything like that. I hope you'll put my email address in the show notes, but let me just throw it out, ben.ortiz@cornell.edu. Please reach out. I would love to hear from you and help you with whatever projects you're working on. I see myself as somebody who's in a position to assist other people doing amazing things. Like I said, man, thanks for this platform, and I'm humbled.